Hey everybody, it's Dr. Tricia Cardner, and today I'm here with my friend and colleague Sean Kraper, and we have something special for you. But before we get into it, I just want to tell you a tiny bit about him and why you should pay attention to what he has to teach us today. First of all, he has been a professional poker player since 2008. He has over seven figures in cash earnings, and he is Jonathan Tamayo, the 2024 World Series of Poker main event champion. He is his cash game coach. So when he talks, I listen. So with all that said, I'm going to turn it over to Sean so he can get started on what he is bringing forth today. Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Tricia. So what we're going to talk about today is a concept that I think gets overlooked a lot, and it is a concept that pros kind of know intuitively, and less experienced players they kind of miss it. They pay attention to a couple of the wrong things, and I like to call it death by the river, right?
Mm.
And we want to talk about how to avoid death by the river.
Yes,
And
let's.
right. And I think it's particularly important for newer cash game players, especially if they've come over from MTTs,
Mhm.
because in MTTs, you're dealing with shorter stack sizes. And in cash games, you can be 100, 200, 300 big blinds deep pretty often. And you want to be planning for how this hand is going to run out, right? What are the likely turns and rivers? Is even if my hand is strong now, how likely is it to be strong by the river, right? How likely am I going to be to want to play a big pot now and in the future, right? And when you're in cash games and the stacks are deep, that could be really important to plan ahead, right? Because the pot grows exponentially as you put money in. So putting more money in now can set you up for just disaster by the river, right? Or death by the
Mm.
river, as we say, right?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so we're going to look at two different hands, and they're both going to start the same. It's going to fold to us on the button. We're going to raise, and the big blind's going to call. Right? And we're going to flop top pair, top kicker. And the way that I usually see this hand play out, right, is the imposition player is going to c bet, right? And because they're going to say I've got top pair, top kicker, that's a pretty good hand. I want to charge this guy if he has draws. I want to charge him if he has a worse 10. Right? This guy's going to call. We're going to get a good clean turn. Right? Beautiful two of clubs. Right?
Love
We're going to
that.
barrel kind of big. Right? He's going to call, and then oh no, disaster. Four straight on the river. Call Tricia. Call your wife. I run so bad. I can't believe this has happened to me again. Right? And then we're gonna, but we're not, we're not an idiot, so we don't bet because we know that we can't get value anymore. Right? And this guy just he wins with 8-9, makes a straight, and he sucked out on us again. Right? And the key here, right, is we should have been prepared for this eventual outcome. Right? When we look at this flop, we can start counting up the turns and the rivers, right?
Mhm.
Like how likely is this to run out good for us? And the answer is not very likely at all. So I'll pull up um, just a deck here. Right? This is just all of the possible turns and rivers. And we've got 10 cards that could bring a flush on the turn, right? And we've got 9 cards that could bring four to a straight on the turn. And so that's 19 what I call death cards, right? These,
Mm.
if we get a flush or four straight on the turn, the hand's over. We don't want to put any more money in. We're hoping this guy checks down. We just really hope that he somehow didn't beat us there. Right? Um, then we've got some other cards that are not good. They're not great. They're not that good. We're not really going to want to put a lot of money in, but they're not death. I call these slowdown cards. So this is just over cards like a king or a queen, right?
Right.
Or the board pairs like an 8 or a 7. So maybe he could pick up trips, right? Um, and so that's 19 death cards and 11 slowdown cards, right? And then we start
So
looking at, okay, what are our good cards? Well, we could make two pair or trips, right? So it's 5 cards. 5 cards make us have a better hand, right? Then we've got some kind of neutral cards, right? These are these low cards that don't do much of anything, right? Those are kind of good for us. I call them neutral, but they're slightly good for us. Um, but another key here is that, like, well, we got a neutral card on the turn. We got one of the better turns in the deck. And then the river was like these death rivers, right? It doesn't matter. Even if we improved, even if we got the good turn, the death river is kind of the end of the hand, right? We
mhm.
can't put more money in. Um, and so the way this works out is this is just for the turn. There's a 63% chance, right, that we're going to get a bad turn for us. Either a death turn, which happens about 40%, right? or a slowdown turn, which happens about 23%. So we're going to get a good turn, 37. We're going to get a bad turn, 63. And on top of that, right, even if you get the good turn, right, even if you made two pair on the turn, right, you still have another 40% chance that you're going to get the death river, right? So two pairs no good when at four straights, doesn't matter, right? So the way that works out is we have an 81% chance, right, when you do the math, of death by the river. And you don't have to do this math every time, right? The key is just recognizing, hey, there's going to be lots of flushes and four straights by the river on this board. My top pair top kicker is not quite as good as it might otherwise appear, right? And I know that you're going to have a little bit to say about the mental game aspect of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because mental game mistakes and strategy mistakes are always like intertwined.
Yep.
So what happens when we get this flop, right, is we have this emotional reaction of like, I need to protect my hand, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I need to bet big. I don't want to let this guy suck out for free, right? And then we, bitch and moan when the six comes out on the river, even though that was the most likely scenario, is that something was going to go really bad here.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like, especially coming from an MTT background, when we see that, top pair, top kicker flop, we're just like stars in our eyes, value, 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 which of course makes sense because of the stack depth in an MTT. But this is totally opposite in the cash games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have that. But then, the way you kind of set up the hand, it's almost like a lot of players are going to have that fear. And so maybe they're not so much even betting it because of a value type proposition, but they're betting it more so because they're afraid. Like, I don't want him to suck out on me. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want. And then it's so interesting because it's the very things that we don't want to happen are so likely to happen in this
Right.
scenario, which maybe you don't understand until you see it really laid out like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, guess what? I only had a 19% chance of feeling good about my hand on the river.
Mm-hmm.
That's really small.
Right.
And I wonder how many of the people who are watching this are kind of surprised by this.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, is just that like it's we're not even necessarily sometimes betting for value.
Mm-hmm.
We're betting to protect ourselves emotionally, right? Because
Right.
we're like I want, and what we do is we do the exact opposite, right? Now we set ourselves up for like this huge pot where we're going to be even more
Mm.
emotional when the
Right.
inevitable outcome happens, right? When the most likely scenario plays out where there's going to be a flush or straight on the board. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously sometimes you get lucky, right? And you get the four straight and he happens to have a worse 10, right?
Right.
But you need to be planning ahead. It's like most of the time this board's going to run out in a way where I actually don't want very much money in the pot. I wish I would have played a smaller pot at this point. And
Mm-hmm.
so we won't talk too much about specifics of like what the exact strategy should be here, right? But it would be something like, don't bomb it just because it's draw and you have top pair, right? You should probably bet smaller check here, right? And I would probably opt for a small bet, right? I think our hand's probably worth a little bit, but not a huge amount. And we'll compare that to a different flop, right? But I think more inexperienced players and like we said, MTT players coming over to cash are probably going to treat two similarly, right?
Mm.
And so it's like 10-7-4, right? Still this kind of middle board. There's still some straight draws out here, right? But there there's a lot less going on. There's no death cards on the turn. And that's kind of the main thing, right? Like there's no card that's just going to totally kill the hand for us. Now, this guy may get lucky. He could make a straight. There's all sorts of things, where maybe we're not going to win the hand, but there's zero death cards, right? There's just no card here that just really totally kills the hand. The worst card in the deck is a jack, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
because it'll complete 8-9. If this guy had a gut shot like jack 8 or jack 9, he just made top pair, right? If he had jack 10, he made two pair. So it's not a good card, right? We still don't want that card to come out. We're going to not want to put a lot of money in after jack turn or jack river, but it's not as deadly, right? We
Right.
have some more slowdown cards, right? The same board pairs, the 9 that kind of connects with some straights, over cards, kings and queens, right? Those will kind of slow us down. And then we've got the same improvement cards. We make two pair or trips. And then we've got more neutral cards, right? And because there's no death cards, these neutral cards are actually just kind of like pretty darn good. If we get a 2 or a 3 on the turn, like we're pretty happy, right, with the hand. Um, And so what this results in is this is just a pot where, or a board where you're much, much more likely to feel good about your hand on the river. Whereas on the other
Right.
one, you're almost always going to feel bad about your hand on the river. So this is the board where you should bet big, right? Because we have the advantage, right? I want this guy to
Hmm.
put a bunch of money in with a bunch of his hands because almost always he's not going to get there. Most of the time, I'm going to want to keep putting money in this pot.
It's
And
very
on the other board,
counterintuitive, isn't it?
right? Yeah, exactly. And I think it's you have to kind of like counteract that emotional
Hmm.
need for protection, right? That you're
Yes.
going to feel on this flop, right? With the just strategic advantage we have on this board, right? I've got top pair, top kicker, and it's probably going to stay a pretty darn strong hand, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
The mental aspect of it is so interesting, right? Because we're trying to protect ourselves from pain, but in doing so, we cause ourselves more pain.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think
We're
that's
just setting
very
ourselves up.
interesting,
Yeah.
right?
For,
Right.
yeah.
That is the twist of it. I always tell my clients that there's three main things that we need to worry about: strategy, execution, and mental game.
Mm-hmm.
And you alluded to it and kind of brought it up. They are so interconnected
Mm-hmm.
whenever we're playing, whether it be cash or MTTs, right? That you can't have one without the other. And you
Yeah,
have
it
to,
is
yeah.
the amount of like technical game mistakes that I go through with my students and the amount of times that they are just that they're really mental game leaks that
Hmm.
it's like the player like knows what they should do, but they don't do it because in
Right.
the moment there's like an anxiety or a fear, right? And so
Yeah.
so step one is knowing that this is going to run out poorly really often, so we don't want to invest a lot. And step two is recognizing that even when we have the fear that I don't want this guy to suck out, there's only like you can't stop people from sucking out, right? Like if he has eight,
Exactly.
and in fact, in this scenario, right, this guy had 8-9, we were flipping on the flop, right? It's not even really a
Hmm.
suck out, right? He had and if he even if he has something like Queen 9, right, that's also roughly a flip, right? So a lot of these hands that we feel like they sucked out on, it's it was they had 40-45% equity, so it's not even really a suck out. Um, and then we're getting frustrated. We're trying to build these pots against these hands with lots of equity in these situations where we're just not going to be happy with that result almost always. Right?
Exactly. So I think the moral of the story is A, you have to improve your strategy, because if you don't understand these things that Sean is talking about, then you're definitely going to get in a quagmire of, both losing your money and emotional,
Mm-hmm.
type of issues,
Yeah.
right? So you have to understand the strategy. You have to know how to execute the strategy, and you have to work on your mental game to become mentally tough so that you can kind of withstand, all
Mm-hmm.
this that's coming at you. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, to me, why I love the game of poker so much, because it is such a complex and interesting, just, I don't know, it's just fascinating to me, right? All the math that goes into it and the
Yeah.
statistics and the psychological elements of it. I think it makes it a
Yeah.
great game.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. The way everything intertwines, right?
Hmm.
Everything's just always interrelated. Um,
Exactly.
it's a never ending learning experience in poker.
Yeah, I do appreciate you taking the time to go over this with us. I think it's really going to help people, and we will have even more coming soon. So make sure you stay tuned for that.
Stay tuned, guys. Thanks, Tricia.
Thanks. See ya.